Has any horror movie in history undergone as drastic a reassessment than Halloween 3? As we all know, when it first came out in 1982, it was met with confusion and disparagement from critics and moviegoers alike. Most were expecting another entry in the Michael Myers saga, and instead got a creepy, bleak movie about a warlock's intention to kill as many children as possible on October 31st, thanks to rigged Halloween masks and Stonehenge or something? The hell did that have to do with the last two movies called Halloween? Only several years later did horror fans begin their reevaluation of the movie. If you accept it as its own thing, which of course it is, it's pretty nifty, spooky little thriller with a handful of very memorable sequences, some terrific performances, and of course, a suitably downbeat finale that flies in the face of the usual happy endings that we were used to being force-fed to us. So how in the name of Samhain did this get made? It's almost time, kids. Don't forget to wear your masks and tune in for the big giveaway as we reveal what the f*** happened to Halloween 3 Season of the Witch.
Mr. Cupfer was right, you know. I do love a good joke, and this is the best ever. A joke on the children.
After writing and producing Halloween 2, franchise creators John Carpenter and Debra Hill were burnt out on the shape, Michael Myers. The experience of making the sequel was not a positive one for them, but the film made money, naturally the only thing that matters to producers, so a third Halloween film became inevitable. As they had on the second movie, Carpenter and Hill reasoned that if they weren't involved, the producers would just go get someone else to come up with a new one, so they begrudgingly agreed to be part of the third chapter. With one small, make that pretty big caveat. This new film would have nothing at all to do with Michael Myers. Instead, Carpenter and Hill wanted to create an anthology of sorts under the banner of Halloween, which would allow them to make a new, unique horror movie that took place around the holiday every year. The suits actually agreed to this quirky new request, and Carpenter and Hill set out to make the first in what they thought was going to be a cool anthology franchise that would last years and years. To direct the film, Carpenter reached out to Joe Dante, then known for Piranha and The Howling. Dante initially agreed to direct, but was eventually tempted away by one Mr. Steven Spielberg, who approached him to helm a segment in Twilight Zone the movie. Before leaving, however, Dante had brought in a writer to work on Halloween 3, a famed British and sci-fi horror author named Nigel Kneale, perhaps best known for the Quatermass Experiment TV series and films. Kneale was admittedly not a fan of the first two Halloweens, nor the slasher genre in general, but the opportunity to craft a unique horror movie that dealt with witchcraft certainly appealed to him, so he agreed to work with Carpenter and Hill on the project. Hill's idea was to blend the world of witchcraft with the modern age of computers. So Kneale came up with the concept of an evil warlock who wants to sacrifice the world's children on Halloween night using a chilling cocktail of advanced technology and ancient spells. The overall story of the Halloween 3 that we know today was all Kneale's plotting, and eventually director Tommy Lee Wallace has claimed that Kneale deserves credit for approximately 60% of the script. Not that he wanted that much credit, or any credit to be precise. After his initial drafts were thought to be too stuffy, too dour, too British, Kneale bristled at the notion of rewriting his work to make it more palatable. According to the author, word came down on high that the movie needed to be more violent, more targeted to the youth of America, which his British sensibilities simply couldn't compute. Kneale eventually left the project and requested that his name not show up in any of the credits, but the structure he left behind gave the existing creative team something to work with. Enter the aforementioned Tommy Lee Wallace. Wallace was a longtime friend and collaborator of John Carpenter's, having been both editor and production designer on both Halloween and The Fog. He was, in fact, in line to direct Halloween 2 at one point, but he hated the script so much that he refused to be a part of it. Once Joe Dante jumped out of the director's chair for the third film, however, the duo went back to their old friend Tommy, offering him the chance to direct their new Halloween, with the understanding that the shape was being left behind, and an all-new story was in the works. With that aspect of it appealing to him, Wallace came on board to direct his first feature film, which was budgeted at around $2.5 million. Carpenter rewrote a good chunk of Nigel Kneale's script, bringing in some more violence and gore before handing it off to Wallace, who did his own rewriting on it. The film already had a green light by the time he came on board, so Wallace didn't have a ton of time to prepare, getting only a few weeks to cast and crew up the film before shooting began. His film was going to be more of a pod people movie than a slasher. According to producers at the time, Wallace's main influence was clearly the 1955 classic Invasion of the Body Snatchers, with its emphasis on paranoia rather than scares. In fact, the creepy corporate town at the center of Halloween 3 is called Santa Mira, which is the name of the main location in Body Snatchers. The ending thoroughly pays homage to the black and white thriller as well, but we'll get to that in a minute. For their leading man, the producers went to an old friend, Tom Atkins. Having worked with Carpenter and Hill on The Fog and Escape from New York, Atkins was like family to the pair, and of course, also knew Wallace very well too. Wallace loved Atkins' grizzled charm, the fact that he wasn't a pretty boy or typical movie star, but a believable blue-collar type who audiences would gravitate towards. I mean, who wouldn't gravitate towards that stash? The producers had a difficult time casting the role of Ellie Grimbridge, the heroine of the piece. Evidently, they were down to the wire, only 2 weeks to go before production, and they still hadn't found the right actress. At the time, a makeup artist on the film was friends with actress Stacey Nelkin and asked if she'd consider auditioning. She was hesitant to do so for a while, not being a fan of the genre, but her agent eventually convinced her to go read for the part. She auditioned and got the role later that day. To play the evil Connell Cochran, the production cast Daniel O'Herlihy, a legendary stage and screen actor who'd later be best known for his role in the first 2 RoboCop movies. Casting him was evidently Debra Hill's idea. While he is phenomenal in the movie, O'Herlihy would later admit that he didn't think much of the film after seeing it. But like everyone else, maybe he just needed to reassess it. The other crucial members of the cast would be the deadly Halloween masks themselves. These were provided by legendary mask maker Don Post, who actually created the William Shatner mask that famously became the Michael Myers mask that we all know and love. The skull and witch masks were already in existence, but the jack-o'-lantern mask was made especially for the film. Post even let the production shoot in his warehouse, so the sequences in Halloween 3 within the mask factory are set in the actual place that Post made his fortune. In return for providing the masks and location, Post didn't ask for money, he asked for merchandising rights to the masks, which were mass-produced in conjunction with the film's release. The majority of the movie was shot in Loleta, a sleepy town in Northern California with a population of only a few hundred people. The town's main industry was its milk factory, and the exterior of said factory serves as the facade of Connell Cochran's warehouse of horrors. Cast and crew would later relate that shooting in the little town was definitely an unsettling experience, as they always felt the townspeople were creepily watching them from behind curtains. Ironically, when the film was first announced in Variety, it was stated that there would be no gore, no violence, no knives. Well, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, because as we all know, the film had a handful of extremely unpleasant scenes, including the death of Marge Gutman, who was played by Tom Atkins' real wife at the time, and the very unfortunate demise of little Buddy Kupfer, whose head melts into an unseemly stew of insects, reptiles, and melted mask. The demise of the Kupfer family was in Nigel Neal's original script, but was not close to as graphic as Wallace's version, as the director wanted to call upon some biblical plague imagery to hammer home just how insidious Cochran's plot really is. Apparently, once the crickets were unleashed from little Buddy's head, the production had a hell of a time chasing them all down, and the chirping of crickets could be heard for weeks from all around the studio. Those poor sound guys. As for the thing that the film is best known for,
Turn that down.
that was created thanks to good old lack of funds. There was no money in the budget to hire a firm to create them an ad, so Wallace went ahead and did it himself. He used London Bridge as a base because he knew that it was in the public domain, hence no rights issues to worry about, and he even hired himself to do the unforgettable
It's time.
voiceover. They had no idea the song would become a cult classic in its own right years down the line.
Stop it! Stop it!
Another trademark of the film is its pessimistic, ambiguous ending. Another callback to Invasion of the Body Snatchers' famous finale, although without the tacked-on happy ending. Distributor Universal Pictures was unhappy with the conclusion, thinking it was too dark and unsatisfying, so they asked Carpenter if he could persuade Wallace to change it. But Carpenter stuck by his friend and used his clout to convince the studio that the downbeat ending wouldn't be going anywhere. Though Wallace eventually admitted that it was perhaps because of the ominous conclusion that the movie didn't do better. When the film was released on October 22, 1982, Halloween 3 was having trouble marketing what it actually was. The poster made it clear no Michael Myers appearances were forthcoming, but audiences were still apparently under the impression that the shape would figure into this new installment somehow. Once the cat was out of the bag, however, the film's box office legacy was cemented. While it opened well enough to the tune of $6 million, it only wound up making $14 million total in the United States. Compare that to the $34 million Friday the 13th Part 3 made earlier that summer, and the writing was on the wall. Audiences were not fond of this new direction for the Halloween franchise. Naturally, the people involved were gutted, especially Tommy Lee Wallace, who admits to being truly crestfallen by the reception the film received. Not only did it immediately kill any future plans for the anthology idea that they'd all had, but the movie was dismissed so harshly by the public that Wallace thought he might never work again afterward. Only many years later would it become obvious that Halloween 3 had been enjoying something of a second life, with a new generation appreciating its bold, grim narrative. Now sit down and put your masks on, kids. It's almost time for the big giveaway. Sing it with me now.
8 more days to Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. 8 more days to Halloween, Silver Shamrock.
Thank you for clicking on our video, everybody. If you like what you saw here, please make sure you like the video and subscribe and share with your friends who like this sort of content. JoBlo was created by movie fans for movie fans, and we appreciate your support.